So welcome back to the Ceph Developer Monthly. This is the May 2018 edition, and we are running this meeting on APEC friendly hours as usual. So before going further, we have some announcements to make. The first one is mountpoint.io. It's a conference about software-defined storage organized in collaboration with Gluster, Ceph, and other open source projects about software-defined storage, right? So I pasted the URL on the chat. The call for papers is open until I think next month, right? And it would be fantastic having submissions from Ceph people on this conference. The second announcement actually has been made on the mailings recently. It's the Ceph user survey. We already had lots of inputs from our community, so I'd like to thank you if you already answered the survey. If you haven't, please consider taking some time to contribute. Right. So going further, we have some announcements on the meeting planning. I think Sage can talk about Mimic status and also on Nautilus priorities, and then we can move to the meeting agenda.
Yeah, I just wanted to give a real quick status update. We've done the feature freeze for Mimic. I guess it was 2 weeks ago. The last sort of trickling thing that we were blocked on was the upgrade support for converting snap realms for CephFS. But I believe Patrick said he expected to get that sorted out, finished testing today. So assuming that happened, then we can cut the first RC tomorrow. At that point, I think the plan is to just do the Mimic branch thing. I missed the leads call this morning. Did you guys talk about that? Josh, Greg?
Whenever you're ready, I think we're good.
Okay.
At least that's what it sounded like.
Yeah, let's just do it. Okay. And I think overall the Rados suite has been looking pretty good. There's still a few lingering issues, but the tests are doing okay. I haven't checked on the other ones, but everybody else seems happy, at least for an RC. So the upgrade tests are doing okay. So that's Mimic. Still hopefully on track to release in maybe 3 or 4 weeks towards the end of the month. So let's make that happen. And then I thought I'd just mention a few of the things. So Nautilus, I guess we'll start as soon as we fork. Another 9 months, it'll be due out February of 2019, similarly towards the end of February. We haven't really done any planning sessions yet to figure out what all is going in and where we're going to be spending our efforts. But I wanted to mention just a couple of things that are sort of on the top of my mind for Nautilus. One, I'd like to get the Messenger 2 protocol changes sorted out and implemented so we can actually make that transition. I think I'm less concerned about the multiplexing aspect of it, which was sort of one of the more complicated pieces, and more interested in making sure that it has the bits and pieces so that it can do encryption over the wire. That's the part that at least on the Red Hat side we're seeing more customer demand for. So there's that. And with that, it would be really nice to get some progress on the Kerberos integration. Luckily, both of those two things have developers working on them, so I'm optimistic as always. But there's that. The other thing is the PG merging, which did not make the cut for Mimic, but will hopefully be mergeable like shortly after we get it out the door for Nautilus. those are sort of the things at the top of my list. Obviously, want to make as much progress as possible on the C-Star work to move down that road. I don't know. Are there any other sort of things that stand out for you, Josh, or anybody else? For the
in my mind is faster logging, which I think we'll talk about later today.
Cool. Yep.
The recovery optimizations for like partial recovery would be pretty interesting too. We'll see if we can get some of those in.
Yep, those seem pretty achievable. The clay codes, it seems like we should be able to do that in this time frame, but we'll talk to Muna here shortly. Jason, is there anything sort of on your radar?
So the RBD namespaces has been bubbled to the top for requests. That's why it's on the list for today.
Cool.
It would also probably be good to stop kicking the can on like the RBD top, and I'd be more than willing to help out on that.
Yep, that'd be good. I think we have a lot more of the sort of infrastructure in place on the manager side and a better idea of how we're going to be consuming it through other tools. So we're in a pretty good position, I think, to tackle that. Okay. I think that's all I had. Leo mentioned the survey. Should go do it, and Mount Point. We should probably plan to do like an evening, whatever, for all the Ceph people that are at Mount Point. That's at the end of August in Vancouver. A bunch of us are planning on being there, so hopefully we'll see people there. All right, should we get started? Is it Shuihan? Is that how you say it?
Hi, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yes. How you doing?
Can you see my screen now? Hello?
I can't see your screen yet.
There we go.
Okay. Last time when we discussed Rails level replication, Josh asked some questions that we hadn't considered those yet, and so we made some modifications to our design, and the result is as follows. The overall architecture of the replication is like this. First, we, as discussed previously, we still classify all operations received by an OSD into two categories. One is those issued by clients, and the other is those issued by other OSDs. And we still think that only those ops issued by clients that need our concerns. And so the replication goes like this. First, the OSDs in the main cluster keep replicating the received rep ops through liberated ops to the backup cluster through intermediate or transfer nodes, in spite of time-slice boundaries. And OSDs in the backup cluster cache these liberated ops in their route ops cache. We call this. We think that we need to add an intermediate pace and between ops journaling and ops applying on the backup cluster. And this pace we call it route ops caching. Its main use is to cache ops those that are not yet able to be applied to the backup data store. And only when monitors in the backup cluster receive the notification message from monitors in the main cluster, indicating that operations earlier than some point of time can be replicated. Does those OSDs in the backup cluster apply those operations to the backing object store. And another thing that is important is that all OSDs and monitors system clocks have to be synchronized with the same set of time synchronization service. As to the time slice boundaries, it is set by monitors. Monitors send out a timestamp, say T-bound to OSDs every time slice interval. T-bound is equal to T current plus time slice interval. T current is the current time of the monitor, and I time slice is the interval of the time slice. This should be configured by users. And after receiving this T-bound message, OSDs first check whether these two conditions are satisfied. The first is their system clocks have to be synchronized with the time sync servers, and the time school should be small enough. And if these two conditions are satisfied, OSD set their post timer. Post timer is a timer that triggers when a suspension of responding clients should be started. When these two conditions are satisfied, OSD set this post timers to be triggered after T2 pass, which is T bound subtract T local, subtract T error, and subtract T delta. Where T local is the system time of the OSD, and T error is the system times the maximum error, which can be obtained through MPT get time. And T delta is the amount of time for the system to finish their preparation work to suspend OSDs to reply to clients. And when the post timer is triggered, OSDs suspend responding to clients for IPOS, and which is 2 times T error plus T delta. And we think that for this timing, to be precise, we may have to use we may have to sorry, this is an error on. We may have to implement a dedicated timer rather than using the shared one, since shared one could involve many other works that could make this T delta not very precise. And after the suspension, when all liberator stops whose timestamps are earlier than T-bound are replicated, which means the commit messages for those liberator stops are all received from the backup cluster. The OSDs report to monitors about their finish of the suspension and the T-bound that they suspend at. If all the OSDs have reported off the pause at T-bound, the monitors should think that the suspension has succeeded and send the notification message enclosing T-bound to the backup cluster, indicating that ops that earlier than T-bound can be applied to the backing data store. OSDs in the backup cluster apply all operations that are earlier than T-bound to the backing store when they receive this notification. We think that there are some circumstances on which monitors should not send the notification. The first is the clock sync condition, which is these two are not satisfied. If they're not satisfied, the USD should report and time sync error to the monitors, indicating that the timing is not precise enough, and the liberator stops applying application should not be triggered. And if the number of OSDs in some PG secting set whose replication ops cache, which is OSDs, the cache that OSDs cache their liberator ops that needs replication but not yet replicated. And if enough OSDs whose replication ops cache is full, then the replication of the of ops for that PG should be suspended, and a message and an error message should be sent to monitors. If there is an OSD reporting the time to error, or there is a PG that is experiencing this replication ops cache full error, monitors shouldn't send out their snapshot notification list down. And in the former case, we think that monitors should switch the OSD that is responsible for the replication to another OSD, whose system is synchronized. That means whose time sync condition is satisfied. And these are the overall architecture.
Okay. Let me stop you there. I've got several questions and notes so far. So going back a little bit, I think at a high level, architecture makes sense. I think you're on the right track. If you go up a little bit, you talked about how you identify which ops are client ops and which ones aren't, and only replicate the client ones. I think just a note, you have to be very careful about how you do that. You can possibly hook this in the issue rep op or new rep op. Anything that's a rep op is something that should get replicated. I think that captures it, but you want to make sure you get things like the snap trimmer activity, which is not actually a client op, is generated by the OSD itself, but does need to be replicated because you also need to to trim those. If there's like a scrub repair operation, that should be captured. Or maybe not, actually probably shouldn't be captured. There's some weirdness with the cache tiering where there are hit set operations. Those ones would probably be ignored if you just want to ignore cache tiering in the case of replication, but that's something to watch out for.
And what about administrative things like creating a pool? I think some administrative things have to be synchronized.
Yeah, I think it might depend on how the it might be that you create the pool on both ends and then link them, or it might be that when a pool is created on one end, it magically gets created on the other end. I'm not really sure which model makes sense. It might be that the PG, you might want different PG counts on the different clusters, on the different, I don't know if that matters or not.
Well, so if you got different PG counts, then I don't think you want to replicate snap trimming stuff. That wouldn't work. And
yeah.
Maybe I'm misremembering, but I think this was a previous goal, was to allow different configurations on different clusters, and so the one that's receiving client ops can just run as normal cluster because it's got this extra thing doing client IO submissions.
It could just do its own snap trimming. To me. Definitely. Yeah. Okay. Yep. Okay. Just going down the list. You have a raw ops cache. Just a NIT, I would call that something other than a cache, because it really, if I'm understanding correctly, it's a buffer, right? You're receiving all the things that you need to write, and you're just holding them until you're ready to apply them. So I would kind of call it like an op buffer or an op queue or something like that. Naming. But I think the main thing that stands out, and I skimmed ahead a little bit here, is the way that you're looking replication ops cache, where you're suggesting reusing the OSD journal, adding pointers to that in order to determine what ops haven't been sent yet and to buffer those. I don't think that's a good idea. Two reasons. One is it's specific to file store, which is just one of multiple object store backends. And so if you relied on that, then you wouldn't work if you use the BlueStore backend or anything else that comes along in the future. That's the first reason. The second reason, though, even if that didn't bother you and you did want to use FileStore, if you're reusing the same journal, then you're sort of opening yourself up to either blocking, or I don't know if you call it a denial of service or something like that, where if the link goes down to the backup cluster and that journal fills up, then you won't be able to do any more writes, and you'll basically stall I/O on the master cluster because the replica isn't able to pull things over. So I expect we'd like to find something that has a maybe not infinitely unbounded, but probably effectively unbounded journal, and so that you can tolerate a situation where like the link goes down for an extended period of time. With the backup cluster, you'll eat up more disk space, but you'll be able to continue using the primary.
So you mean we better find a way to implement an unbounded journal to be implemented as the replication of Ceph. Is that right?
I think so. That's in my mind at least, that's like the simplest conceptual thing. You probably, I don't know if you want it to be like infinitely embedded, like if it becomes 100 gigabytes or something, then maybe you want to either like throw it out and like force a full resync. But in general, it seems like you should be able to tolerate at least like modest downtime. So like if your backup cluster goes down, link goes down for an hour, then like you shouldn't break the primary cluster as a result. And these journals, the journal on the OSD is pretty small. Like it's probably like a minute of time, right? So it wouldn't be big enough to. But I think that the bigger issue is that it's specific to the file store, and ideally this should work regardless of the backend. The downside, of course, is that if you're just writing twice, you're writing into like a big journal object, and then you're also actually doing the write, then you're like doubling your I/O. So you don't sort of get the freeness of the journal. It's going to be slower and cost more. I don't know. I haven't really come up with a way to like avoid that without getting too clever.
Okay, I get you.
Yeah.
I get your point, and but the following issue is all based on the fact that replication of Ceph is we're using the existing OSD journal, and we think that we should modify all of these.
Okay. Okay. So we'll skip the rest. I do want to take a step back though and just make sort of a high-level comment. I want to be totally upfront. I think it's highly unlikely that we're going to want to merge this type of capability into the Ceph upstream OSD anytime soon. We're in the midst of like doing a major rewrite refactor on the OSD, and it's going to be a lot of code churn and a lot of things changing around. And I don't want to make any promises that like if you get this to work, it's going to get incorporated upstream. I want to make sure that don't set expectations. Once we get past all that, then I think it's just an open question. It kind of depends what the implementation looks like, and I think at that point we can sort of decide whether it's a good idea or a bad idea. This is something that we were really excited about maybe like 2 years ago. And so if you'd asked me then, I would be like, jumping up and down, very excited about it. It's not something that I see as much demand for these days. And I think partly that's because most of the multi-site disaster recovery type scenarios we've dealt with at higher layers. In Rados Gateway, there's a whole multi-site federation capability that does a lot more than just disaster recovery, and it sort of works better when implemented at that higher layer. And on the RBD block side, there's also RBD mirroring that does multi-site replication and is much more flexible than doing it at the Rados level.
Well, I mean, if I was a king for the day, if you kind of take like the concept of like the cache tiering v2 or something like that, and you could add a layer where it's like it does the same thing as RBD Mirror, and it does a journal, but it does like it journals like each PG as it gets the right operation has to go send it to like its journaling tier to like journal it off before it can like commit it up, and then on the other side it's just reading from that journaling tier to get the same effect of like what RBD Mirror does right now, where it's got like n number of objects. It kind of like divides its work over and then tries to replay them in order.
Yep. I mean, there are definitely scenarios where it would be awesome. What I can't tell is if it's like, usually the rationale is that if we implement it at the Rados layer, then we don't have to do it all the other layers. But when we do it at a layer up, you can cover a lot more different scenarios.
Yeah,
you can do individual images, synchronizing or not synchronizing, all that stuff.
The RBD case is obviously the one downside is the double the latency basically from client-side connection to OSD connection. But even if I guess you did a cache v2, you would still potentially like be going off somewhere else. But
and just the operator flexibility, right? You can have individual images can have different mirroring configurations, whereas at the Rados level would be the entire pool. Right. Yeah, I think that's the main thing. So I guess I don't want to like be too aggressively discourage you. If this is something that like makes sense for you, you should pursue it. Just don't assume that it's like it's gonna be incorporated until we sort of know more. But I would encourage you to think about what the specific I guess high level user problems, business problems, or whatever are that you're trying to solve. Whether is it just disaster recovery, or is it something else? Like, is what you really want a file system that has a DR copy in another site? Maybe a better way to do that is at the file system layer. It might be less effort. It might be more flexible. Whatever it is. But I would consider those sort of questions before assuming that this is going to be the best path. Because although I totally believe that we could implement this capability in Rados and it would be super slick, I'm not convinced that it's actually like the best way to solve the whole, range of different problems. Yeah.
Oh, okay, I understand that. Thanks for the suggestions.
Yeah. Okay. You should know that who was it? I think was it Ricardo and Joao, I think, talked about this a couple months back. They're also interested in this problem. You might want to check in with them. They're probably not on the call because they're in Europe.
Okay.
But yep. It'd be interesting to hear once you've sort of taken a step back or whatever, what your plans are on the email list or whatever.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. That's all for me now.
Okay. Do you have anything, Josh? Do you have any comments?
I think you covered most of it pretty well.
Okay. Okay. All right. Did Mina come back? I saw she dropped the other. I think you're next up. Talking about clay codes.
Can you hear me?
Yes. I think so.
Yeah. So I updated the pull request. Recently, I've done some like very basic tests on putting an object with this particular new plugin, and repair and decode scenarios I have tested. So the unit test part is not done yet, but like very basic testing is done, and this code can internally use any JErasure plugin or ISAL plugin, so that can be given as input in the Erasure code profile. So currently I did not document this part on how the commands should be run, etc., but I'm planning to do that. And yeah, so about the code review, I was wondering like when will this review be done, and I mean what should be the process for the unit testing as well. I would like to know what are the things to be implemented for unit testing.
As far as the review goes, I might have missed something, but I thought we were just waiting for you to do your last round of revisions and fix some bugs. I didn't realize it was ready for review.
Yes, it was not ready. That's
okay, but it is now.
So right now, yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I don't think, how big is it? I don't think there's anything really blocking. We just need to, we're probably going to be focusing on the Mimic bug fixing for the next couple of weeks. Once that's sorted, I don't think there's going to be, I don't think there's anything really blocking it. It's just a matter of going and looking at it. On the testing side, let me think. I'm gonna have to like remember what all we do on the EC side. Do you remember, Josh, what the pieces are?
I'm not sure what the unit tests look like for encoding and decoding, but we certainly have more integration style tests for that run through everything with the different erasure codes. Like at the moment, I guess we have different like subsuites in Teuthology for running with each erasure code. So we could probably want to copy one of those and make it use a clay code. And then that would get basically the same coverage as all the other erasure codes.
Yeah, the Teuthology one. It's the easy one. I'm looking at the unit tests. There's a bunch of ones that test the plugins. Like if you look in the test erasure code directory, there's a bunch of stuff. You can probably just copy one of these and update the tests. There's one for like ISA, JErasure, LRC, and check. That would be a start. Maybe you already have that. And then the integration test. I think the last thing is there's a non-regression piece that I've never actually looked at, but I think what it is a bunch of random data that's been encoded and then stored, and the test just makes sure that it can decode it, so that we don't like break the code over time with some small change or something in a way that makes it undecodable.
Okay, so I didn't get the last test part. Where is it available in GitHub?
It's called the erasure code non-regression. Let me see what there's a file. I think this is it. If I remember correctly, there's actually a submodule that just has a bunch of data in it. Is that right? I don't remember. Maybe not. I'm not sure how it works. Never actually looked at it, but I think that's one to look at. The idea is that we store data and then we make sure we can decode it. That was what I thought it was, but I don't actually see where the data is, so maybe I was just wrong. You know, Josh?
Okay, so I think I'll search for this and I'll send a mail on Ceph dev in case I don't find it. But
okay.
I'll be on this.
But yeah, I mean, just starting with that that simple unit test, which is in that same directory, running the similar tests to what the other ones are doing. Maybe they might actually just be like making sure the plugin loads actually. Now that I think about it, the check one has a whole bunch of tests, but the other ones are pretty basic. So.
Okay.
I don't see anything that actually runs the non-regression test at the moment.
Yeah, I don't either. That's kind of lame. And I don't see the non-regression data. I thought there was like a, oh no, there is. So it's Ceph erasure code corpus. So there's a submodule that has a bunch of erasure encoded data. That might possibly weren't running.
Oh wait, I think it's cited to make checks. I think it's rendering that. Okay.
Yeah, but it's basically just like a bunch of erasure code profiles, and then a bunch of data that was encoded with its encoded data and its decoded data, and the test just goes and like decodes it all and makes sure that it's the same, and vice versa. So that's the thing to look at. We should probably update this so that we have a new data. Like there's no data here, I don't think, for oh no, there is Sheck. Sheck is in here too. That's good. That's not so bad. This is the thing to look for. Yeah, if that's run through make check, it's easy to do locally. Sorry, what was that?
No, I got this other name as well. It's erasure code corpus, is it?
Yeah. Yep. That's a submodule.
Yep. Yes, I got this module. I'll test this as well. I think this is done as part of make check. Is that true?
Exactly. Yep. You got it.
So I should add some more tests for this particular plugin.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think the thing to do would be just come up with a bunch of erasure code profiles that stack Clay on top of JErasure and maybe ISA and whatever, some variety that have different values of K and M, and then just feed it a bunch of, it doesn't matter what data you're encoding, just a bunch of random lumps of data that have some a little bit different from each other, not just like zeros or something, and then dump them in there, and that'll help us catch if we change something. Yeah.
Sure, I'll look into it.
Cool. Okay. Yeah, otherwise, I think probably the big thing is just to add a facet to the Teuthology tests and then run it through Teuthology. That might actually be something that whoever decides to test this can do pretty easily. But once the code's reviewed, we can start just hammering on it and make sure it seems to hold up.
Okay, so for this, do I have to?
Sorry, your audio cut out a little bit. What was your question?
So this Teuthology test, is it part of this test folder framework, or is it something different?
So the Teuthology tests are different. There's a QA subdirectory, QA suites, Rados, Thrash. Let me see if I can find it. I'll give you the path, and it's a little bit obtuse if you're not used to using it. Essentially, there are workloads that use different erasure code profiles and then hammer it. So you can basically look at the ones that are in there and probably copy that and change the erasure code profile to add new cases to the test matrix. And if it's not clear, just ask one of us on IRC, or we can help figure it out. That's no big deal. But that'll be sort of maybe not the next step, but the next to last step, which is just to do all the integration tests, stress tests to make sure that it holds up.
Okay.
But yeah, I'm excited. Great to hear that the revisions are done and it's ready for review again. I'm gonna tag it. Needs review. Really notice. Yeah. Anything else? Are we missing anything?
think that's it. And I'm also very excited to see this going in. It'll be great.
Yes. Very excited. Cool. Do you have any other
Good to know that.
questions?
I look forward to working with you all, like in getting this in.
Awesome. And you know how to ping us on the IRC channel? Or the email list, of course, works too, but it's often quick to get a hold of us on IRC if you have questions. You get answered quickly.
You mean the chatting channel of Ceph? Is
Yes.
that?
Yep.
Okay. Yeah. Sure. I'll do that.
Yep. Okay. All right. Great. Thanks. All right. Next up is RBD namespaces. It's all you.
All right. So this is mostly derived from blueprints and things like that from years ago. So the original proposals were basically that there be a single unified directory bucket for all RBD images, and then it was just that the ID object would basically say, well, this particular RBD image XYZ is actually all the data is in namespace ABC.
So the head would be outside the namespace?
Yeah, so the head's outside the namespace. So what I'm proposing though is to basically say, no, that if we're gonna do this, let's do totally isolated, equivalent of like RGW buckets, like where a namespace would be equivalent to a bucket. Where if I say put an image in a given namespace, it's totally isolated in that namespace. So if you do an RBD LS, you won't see it. You'd have to do like RBD LS, in namespace ABC to see the image, and then we can use the suffix caps with the existing namespace support to basically lock it down at a high level.
Okay. Can we talk about that for one sec?
Yep.
That definitely is like, that's definitely a cleaner. Sorry, what?
I'm just getting a crazy like digital view on my monitor right now from Blue Jeans.
It's always never a dull moment. So completely separating out the directories and RBD or whatever namespaces, like that's certainly like the cleanest thing. There's like no complexity around them interfering with each other or whatever. So it's attractive from that context. I'm just want to make sure we've thought through the sort of usability piece where you won't be able to list the RBDs if you don't know the namespace.
Which I think is fine. So I was proposing that we have an object that tracks in-use namespaces, like a RBD namespaces. So there'd be several objects that we already have, like the RBD mirroring objects. We're going to keep those in the default namespace. So it doesn't matter what namespace images are being stored in. But as a storage admin, I set up RBD mirroring, so I'm setting it up, globally. I'm not setting up on a per namespace basis, like, oh, let me go add a peer and things like that. That's pretty complicated. And then as a storage admin, I would need to know what namespaces are in use. So I was kind of proposing that we would also track those as like a directory of in-use namespaces. With two proposals there, one of them is that the admin would have to explicitly add the namespace before it can be used. If you try to do RBD image create in a namespace that hasn't been added to that directory, you'll be denied, or we can do something where we just implicitly create it on the first image that gets added to the.
That seems reasonable. By explicitly creating them, that seems like it makes sense. Can I back up just 1 second though? You said that the mirroring object is external to the namespace because it's an admin operation to configure mirroring. That makes sense. But you list it right next to RBD trash. And I would think trash is something that happens inside the namespace, where if I delete an image.
Yeah, sorry, that was a mistake. Sorry, I just added line 15 or whatever. I said RBD directory, RBD group directory, and RBD trash should be for
Got it. Okay.
Our per namespace.
Okay.
We don't for things that are like a given user. Let's try not to leak the data. But for things like RBD mirroring, right now it stores not only your peer configuration, also stores the list of images that are being mirrored. So we would just, for each of those images, we'd have to also add on a little tag that says, and it's also in namespace ABC.
Sorry, I'm not very familiar with the mirroring object. Does that expose? Is that accessible to the client?
Yes.
Or is it only an admin thing?
What's in it? Yeah, what is it?
There's no secret. There's no secrets in it or anything like that. If that's what you're asking.
Well, but I mean, it contains names. It sounds like, and the client has to be able to touch it.
Yeah.
Okay.
What's in it? What does it contain?
So, so right now it contains your peer information, like go connect to cluster ABC, and also has a list of all the images that are being mirrored.
Right. So, but I mean, if you mount an image that's being mirrored, do you touch that object from the mounted client?
No, just
okay.
the mirror daemon. Yeah.
Okay. Sorry, that's what I meant by the client. Okay, yeah.
The person that you would be writing to that object if you enabled mirroring on something, and that's why, like lower down for, I say that under the RBD mirror daemon, expanded to include the mirroring namespace and the profile RBD cap that we have, the shortcut, could be modified to allow class method execute permissions on that specific class method, so that he doesn't get full permission to touch that object. It'd be something like, hey, go add me to it. And also, I say later down in the OSD section, it'd be great if we could add just a little helper method for the class methods to say, hey, please validate this cat for me. So then within that class method of, hey, add this to the directory and image in this namespace, we can say, does this person have permission given his caps to touch that namespace? And if they don't, they can't add that image or delete an image.
So I'm confused again. So the people who touch the RBD mirror object, it's clearly the RBD mirror daemon itself uses that object.
But when you create an image that has mirroring enabled,
you also
it needs to add it to the directory, right? So adding and removing to the directory are something that
but that doesn't sound like a user function. That sounds like the API function that creates volumes for them does. Like if you're an OpenStack, then the dashboard, like you put in the dashboard, create a volume for me, and then that does stuff using like
if it has higher
administrative keys. Yeah, but it's not like the users will have to say, oh, hey, now I have a new image that I just made up.
Well, but again, like if someone gives them the caps to do that, they can do it, and that's why I was saying if they have the caps to do it, let's at least restrict them down to touching that, manipulating entries in that to things that are within their namespace that they have caps for.
So it feels like there are three layers here. Like one is the operator, the cluster operator that's like creating namespaces. One is a user who has access to a single namespace but is allowed to create and delete images within that single namespace. They have to be able to poke at this object, just like they poke at the directory. And then the last one is like, I have access to one image. I'm just reading and writing that one image.
Correct.
Well, okay. So what's the use case then for someone who has access to a namespace but can also like only a namespace but can create whenever images they want in that namespace? Who is that user?
I think
someone that's given a tenant like role or something like that. Yeah, obviously.
I think it could be Cinder. You could imagine multiple Cinder things restricted to individual namespaces.
Okay, so this is isolation of the services that are running, though. It's not like
I think, or like maybe it's like a work group or something. Like I think that one makes sense. My actual issue is that when you get to the point where you're restricting calls to class methods in order to control access to this RBD mirroring object, that's the exact same problem we were trying to solve with the RBD directory, and we decided was sort of too complicated, and so we just put an RBD directory inside each namespace. Right? So it's the same problem where you create an image or you delete an image and you need to add or remove it from the directory. And previous proposals had a global RBD directory that everyone could read and write to, and we had to restrict the class method. So it's like identical problem, right?
Well,
With RB
yeah,
mirroring object.
except you can't have two people in two different namespaces create an image called foo because they would collide, as opposed to now if you have two different namespaces, they're totally isolated. Right.
But
so
I guess my question is, I think it's kind of attractive to just have a separate directory per namespace and have the namespace creation be this like operation. Can we just do the same thing with the RBD mirroring object, and then we bypass all the weird cap enforcement on like class methods?
Well, we already support that right now, so that's not a new thing. But if you do it, are you saying an RBD mirroring object per namespace?
Yeah.
Then you have to have the RBD mirroring image, basically, of the daemon open up n number of RBD mirroring objects, establish watches on them.
Yeah.
For changes and things like that.
It feels analogous to the directory. Yeah, it feels analogous to the directory. So it feels like if we're going to go to the effort of making sure that the cap system is robust enough to restrict access to add and remove this like shared object that's outside of the namespace, then we could do the exact same thing for the directory.
So yeah, it becomes kind of weird because like the ones that are in namespaces don't contain your peer information; they just contain images. Because right now the mirroring object contains both your configuration and what images are being stored. But if it's in a namespace, you're not going to have like namespace ABC say, oh, but here's the peers I want to replicate with. That would be your storage admin that sets up all that replication stuff that you as a tenant shouldn't have access to. It's not that big of a deal. It's just, the bigger deal is the potentially watching n number of objects across. But I mean, it's no different than RBD mirror daemon watching an m number of images, I guess. Well, because it has every image that it's open that it's writing to. I mean,
yeah,
it has all those images open with a watch established on the RBD image header. So it's not the end of the world. It's just The downside with those directories is as soon as you lose a watch, it has to go reread the entire object again to make sure it's in sync.
It feels doable to lock down these shared objects via class methods, but I'm pretty sure it's going to require like futzing with the capabilities, because my recollection is that you can restrict which methods you call, but what we actually want to do here is also restrict what arguments you pass to the methods. So you can only add directory when the namespace equals foo.
Yeah, and it wouldn't be a caps. That would just be like a little helper method inside the class method that you have to add that says, does the person?
But how would you know? How would you know which namespace that person is allowed to access from inside? Would it just be? Do we make it?
Yeah, that's why he's asking for a new function.
The OSD already has the caps, right? So it's already doing validation. So it'd just be, hey, validating the one the object I'm currently operating on. Do they have the caps for this object, which would be the current object name in a different namespace, right?
Yeah, I had this like vague recollection of talking about when we were locking down what the cap syntax for calling a class method. You specify the class and the method name, but then you could also specify some arbitrary key value pairs that are sort of interpreted by the class however the class wants to interpret it. But I don't see it in the code. I think we just talked about it. We didn't actually do it.
Yeah, so there's nothing like that. It's just.
But I think that's what you need. You need to say, I'm allowed to call class, RBD directory add, and then you sort of have your key value namespace equals foo. And that's sort of an implicit, that gets passed into the class method. And so it knows it's restricted in that way. Know what I mean?
But the OSD is already doing cap validation, right? So it knows the person's caps.
Yeah, but it's just a yes or no answer. It says, this says I can call this method, so it calls the method.
Right. So
I don't want somebody.
I think you guys are missing it. Jason just asked for a class function that returns to the class to the object class the caps, and the object class can just parse it and say,
like return me the bit flag that it's like they have read write whatever access to it.
But then your class has to like
getting the
parse
caps would be a lot easier.
But even if it did that, like the cap might say be a list of like 30 different namespaces that I have access to.
No, I don't want to parse the caps. I want to have a method that says it's give me like the same thing that's happening right now inside the primary replicated PG or whatever, where it says, am I allowed to do this? Can I do this?
Am I allowed to write to this? Got it. Okay.
Here's what I'm about to do. I want to read and I want to write. I want to execute this. And the equivalent would be just as CXX CLS. Can I do this, please? Against here's the name of the object generically, and here's what I want to do to it, and it would say yes or no.
To be specific, the cap would have two parts. The first one would say you're allowed to read and write to namespace foo, and the second part would say you're allowed to call rbd.add or whatever, and the rbd add would ask the cap, am I allowed to read and write to foo?
Yes.
Given I passed okay, so that would work.
That was a proposal. I said, I'm also fine with just saying it's 100% separate. RBD mirror changes more because it needs to. Now that if we're gonna go with the RBD namespaces thing, like this listing, so RBD mirror will know which namespaces it needs to try. Periodically poll to say, hey, do you have images to mirror?
Okay.
It's not the end of the world.
Yeah. I don't think I have an opinion about whether
RBD mirror is the biggest change here.
Yeah.
It's what made everything difficult.
Yeah. Well, if my recollection is that we were like talking about the same set of issues for RBD directory before, and it still feels to me like it's basically the same problem. The data is less sensitive in the directory. It's just the name of the image, whereas in RBD mirroring, there's also some like peer metadata.
Well, no, it's similar though, because it's not the same thing because a given tenant user has no need or cap to list the directory contents, whereas a given user does need to have a mirroring directory contents where they do need the permission to always do an RBD LS, right? So you'd be leaking information when you do an RBD LS with a unified directory.
Not if you disallow, not if you do the same thing where you're only allowed to call the list methhed on the directory, and it filters the result for you.
You'd have to filter, right? Cap, 1,000 images later.
Right. I guess list would be slower because it'd be like a order in thing.
I get yelled at for like, why is the OSD like locked up for 5 seconds doing something?
I don't have a good sense on the mirroring side. I don't have a good sense of whether it's better to just have the mirror daemon watch a bunch of separate objects or to go the effort of walking down the class methods. It just makes me nervous that we're doing a different thing for the directory and the mirroring. But I'd love to hear from everyone else and see. I don't know if it's just me.
And if we just say that anyone who's setting up mirroring has to be privileged, does that mean we can just avoid this whole problem? Because that sounds like a good answer.
It's not, because if my understanding is that you set up mirroring for like the pool or the namespace, and when you create new images, you have to touch that object. So it still gets touched on RBD create and RBD RN. That's why.
Yeah, but again, anyone who's creating new images is like an API. It's a service of the cluster. It's not.
For now, yes. Not necessarily in the future.
No,
right?
I mean, like, is there anyone who doesn't bill on the amount of disk space you use, like or whatever? Like the cluster admin needs to be in the path for creating volumes anyway.
Or you audit it later and say, here's how much you're actually using, right? So.
Yeah, I'm not. I can't tell. I think for OpenStack that is the case. It's all going through Cinder and like who cares? But I can imagine scenarios where you want to like say you have your own little playground, you can create whatever images you want, but you're isolated from everyone else, and you get sort of like a work group operator type role. I can imagine.
But I mean, who's gonna set up that sort of thing without having some kind of service doing part of the work? Like no one's going to teach ordinary users to run the RBD command line to create their images and set them up. They have.
Someone does.
If they're running a service.
Otherwise, there would not be an RBD create command.
Well, I think even if it's not, even if it's a code that's doing it, even though it's like an API endpoint or whatever, there's still like this principle of least privilege where if this provisioner, let's say it's a provisioner in Kubernetes, that's only mapped to like one namespace of a pool, like you'd still want to lock that down to only be able to create images in that pool.
Yeah, but again, I don't think that use case exists. Like, yes, you want to be least privileged, but anyone who's actually creating an RVD volume is going to need to have enough privilege.
Like, none of these use cases exist because we don't support namespaces in RVD.
No, I mean the point of namespace is that you can set up clients so that when you distribute the keys, then they can't go look at other people's stuff. But that's because clients need to be able to look at the actual data, like, or I mean, either the hypervisor does, or in which case it's less critical, which is how we've gotten away with it. But the hypervisor makes sense. Like that's an attack surface for people to exploit. But you need an admin that can do RVD admin stuff, and you can't. But I just can't imagine any scenario in which you have a thing where you're like, oh, we want to have a separate service running that's allowed to create images, but it's not fully privileged because we want a different service to do more.
Why can't you have like two different user groups that are allowed to operate on their own data, but not like with each other's data, for example, but use the same cluster?
Yeah, and at that point you need an API. So you're saying that they're going to have their own, that they're going to have intermingled data so that they don't have any quotas on each other. Because like if they have any sort of separation at all, then they're going to use different pools so that the admins can track who's using how much data and who needs more provisioned stuff or whatever, right?
Wow, not necessarily, because like you can have look at CloudForm. It's just going to scrape data, say like here's actually what's being used. Cinder does that right now. It says like here's what's being used by given tenants. It's all the same pool, but
RVD DU.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of these scenarios, you're not so much limiting on quota, you're just billing based on usage after the fact. Like the more they use, the better. But I can imagine a case. I mean, that the whole goal with namespace is to separate out the data layout from the sort of the policy security part. So you have different work groups that are logically using different pools or whatever, but they're not actually different pools because you want to have a single set of PGs.
Okay, they're not logically using different pools. They're using different security domains.
Right, exactly. Right. So in that case, like those two different user groups, one of them might like set up a Cinder thing, one of them might like use the command line, like who knows? But they shouldn't be able to. They should be able to create. It feels like you should be able to create and delete images without going and poking at somebody else.
It's like Back to the Future. Like,
I mean, hey, if you want to do this, Jason, that's fine. I'm just like, it sounds like you're going to a lot of effort to support a use case that I don't think anyone's going to care about. And it seems like it would be a lot easier if you just said, nope, we're not going to support that use case. But I don't have any objection to either of the options you've talked about. So it's just, speed of development and ease of maintenance stuff.
I have this is a related question, I think, about what the security mode model is, or whatever. I guess user roles. I guess it's about user roles. Because you said that mirroring is something that you set up as an operator, as like a cluster operator, but we sort of have these three roles, right? There's like the person who's reading and writing a single image. There's the person that's creating and deleting images within a namespace, and then there's the person who like runs the whole cluster and can create namespaces. Is it just the cluster operator that configures mirroring and the mirroring options, or does the like person in a work group, the work group operator, can they do it also?
No, it would be the storage admin that configures the high level, like here's here's the sites we're replicating to, here's the peers. Then you could say that the next level down, the person responsible for the creation of images or whatever, if they decide that yes, it should be replicated or not, they would need to be able to do that. The person reading and writing the images doesn't need to touch RBD mirroring or anything like that.
Yeah.
They need access to the journal, right? That's all they care about.
I guess, and this is kind of in the spirit of what Greg is saying. I think it might be worth just writing up a short document that clearly defines what these sort of roles are and what they're allowed to do, or not allowed to do, and just run that by some other people, just to make sure we're not making up a weird scenario. Because I can imagine a situation where you might have like a couple different options for where you can replicate to different remote sites, and you might want to choose between them. I don't know how you would realistically like restrict that though. I think it has to be
That's where you got to bring a different pool in.
Yeah, it seems like you kind of need the cluster operator to like put some fences around like what other clusters you're set up to talk to or whatever.
Well, because then it's also intimately tied to an RBD mirror daemon that's doing all this stuff. So I can be like a bad operator that says, yeah, just dump all this data like over to this like rogue cluster, over here or something like that.
Can you like just turn it on and off? Can you turn mirroring on and off on an image?
Yes.
Without, as a lowly peon person, or do you have to be the cluster operator that does that?
The cluster operator, the storage operator, is only responsible for the low-level configuration. But if you wanted to, like the ability to turn off mirroring on a given image, that's if you have access to that image, you can say on or off. Like, because I can if you have access to like disable the journaling feature bit, like that implicitly disables.
Got it.
Mirroring, right?
Okay. Got it. Okay.
And we don't have RBAC anyway, so that's basically right now, if you can write to the RBD image header, which is anyone that's basically reading and writing to the image, or you're this other intermediate role. Like there's no like, we don't have the 3 levels of control right now because we would have to lock down to specific class methods. I mean, nowadays, now that we can lock down to specific class methods, we probably could get to that level, but it's not there now. Like, no, I know people have like said like, how do I lock down to the one specific image? Well, you can't realistically.
Okay, so I'm going down this list a little bit. So you moved RBD trash into the per namespace category.
Yeah.
And so there's nothing special there. So this bit down here at line 36 or whatever can just get removed, right?
Yeah.
You just get that. Okay. Yeah. Okay. I mean, it seems like it still feels awkward to have different strategies for directory mirroring, but it might be that their usage patterns are different enough that it sort of justifies it, because mirroring is just only has one reader that's privileged, and it's just the unprivileged writers, whereas directory has unprivileged readers. So it's a little different, but I mean, either way works.
All these are basically, I mean, these tasks are going to be like able to be done in sprint form, right? So that you can keep adding on as layers. So if a given thing like, oh, it just says like if you use namespaces, RBD mirroring doesn't work, at the end of the day, because that's like that's where we cut Nautilus, and that's how much was like implemented.
Yeah, right.
It doesn't mean namespaces don't work. It just means mirroring doesn't know about it.
It kind of feels to me like the big user facing change here, aside just from being able to use namespaces at all, is that namespace is something that you explicitly create. It's like a first class concept, where I create a namespace for work group 1 and another one for work group 2, and that sounds fine to me.
Yeah,
so I think that makes sense.
That's the one. I mean, that's actually, I had a question mark on that one. It's like, if everyone thinks that's like an okay role, or do the implicit where it just says, well, I've created a namespace ABC, and now magically I'm tracking namespace ABC.
Yeah, I do kind of wonder if you're going to get into a situation like with snapshots where in the end the implicit was much easier to use, like with the protection and unprotection stuff, where like if you have stuff in a namespace and you have to go delete the stuff in the namespace before deleting the namespace, or
Yeah, no, it would have to be exactly like that, right? So you have to do all this that fun interlocking about. I'm removing it, but you can't remove it because it's.
Yeah.
It's got images in it.
I mean, that almost suggests that having a single directory object that has every namespace in it might be easier, because that could track the state of like this image is also in the trash, and so the namespace is no longer used, or whatever it is. I mean, like I don't know how the trash works right now. When you move something into trash, does it get removed from the directory?
Yeah.
So the list of namespaces could just be, a class operation on the directory just takes a union or whatever. All the distinct namespaces mentioned in the directory are just also there, stored in a little set at the beginning. And so then that stuff would just sort of magically happen. But then the trash object would also have to be also global and all the rest.
Just one giant directory object for everything.
Yeah. This would be slow. So directory and the trash are the two per namespace ones.
Group directory too.
Group directory, I don't know what that is.
RBD image groups. We create a group, say this is foo, and you assign images A, B, and C to foo.
Okay.
What about like the children for the object for the clones and?
Children would be per namespace. Yep. It's going away, but yeah.
Okay, cool.
Children will die when clone v1 dies.
Someday.
Well, it's automatically configured to automatically switch to clone v2 if your min client version is mimic on your cluster.
Okay. What does clone v2 do? Where does it store that?
You don't need a protector. You don't need a protector on protect snapshots anymore. It's just in the actual RBD image itself, it stores its children.
Okay, gotcha.
And the children register back to that, and that's why I added in Mimic. That's why I added support for saying your caps allow you to go touch, no matter what pool it is. If you have access to read this image, you can call the add child, remove child like class method
right.
on another image.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense.
So then it does all the atomic reference counting and things like that about its children. It can detect if a parent snapshot is still in use and you want to delete it, it lets you delete it, but it moves it to a snapshot trash namespace that will automatically get deleted when the image gets deleted or the last clone gets deleted.
Okay, cool. Yeah, so that makes the namespace stuff easier there too.
Yeah, if you have to scan every possible namespace for children.
Yeah, exactly.
No. Yeah, it'd have to be like no cross namespace cloning for v1.
Yeah, is there some old RBD version, image versions that we want to phase out? Was it the V1?
V1, you can't create them anymore. They're still there, but you can't. With Mimic, you can't create them anymore. That's why we were trying to get live image migration and also for Mimic, so we could kick people in the butt and say like, get off V1 image formats.
Okay.
So we could stop supporting it in free releases or however long the upgrade cycle would mean that we would have to support it for.
All right, cool.
Yeah, Tmap. Yeah, that's the one thing, right? Everyone wants to get rid of Tmap.
Yeah. There's
the good thing, if you can't create it anymore, technically we probably could just do something to get rid of the Tmap ops, because it would just be, they wouldn't be deleted. If you removed a V1 image, it wouldn't get deleted from the directory.
If somebody tried to use an existing one.
Well, it doesn't use the directory to open an image, right? It uses the.
Oh, I don't know about that.
Yeah, it's got a totally different object that's like for V1, it's like the name of the image .rbd or something like that, and it uses that. The directory is really only for RBDLS.
This is bit of a tangent, but I seem to remember a discussion recently where somebody noticed that there was a big performance differential between V1 and V2 images. Was that because of the was it because they had the object map enabled on V2 by default, and so the writes had to go update the object map before it wrote? Is that what it was? Do you remember this?
Probably, or was the clone? I mean, it's never been a problem with the image format itself. It's
and you can turn off you can turn off the object map on V2, right?
Yeah, but it's like clones, right? Like it's amortized cost. So as long as the first write to the object, it hurts. Every other write, it doesn't.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Someone starts to refresh it hurts.
Yeah.
Seems like most often it's just the exclusive lock and people getting confused about FIO using the same image multiple times.
Ping pong. It works. It just works slowly.
FIO.
Yeah, the num jobs 4. It's so slow. Use 4 images.
Okay. Well, this I think my suggestion is still just I would write out what the security role whatevers are and what they're allowed to do, and just validate that with, I don't know, like some OpenStack people or something, just to make sure it makes sense. And then maybe have like one last think about whether you use the shared directory or the per namespace directory. Still feels like we're sort of leaning towards the per namespace one, like the way you wrote it up, but it seems like it could go either way. I didn't really follow where we ended up with the thing you were talking about, Josh, with the trash, the implications of cleaning up the trash and deleting namespaces.
Oh, it wasn't the trash per se. He was talking about this is the reference to the snapshots. This was about like, what if there's a race condition between I want to remove that namespace, but someone at the same time is like attempting to add an image to that namespace, something like that. There's just, how do you atomically guarantee that no one's writing to a namespace or create an image in a namespace?
Just suggesting that maybe that
two-phase do with it. It just does 2 ops and calls it a day.
Or what if you put something in the trash and then you want to delete the namespace, but the trash hasn't been emptied yet? Does it not let you delete the namespace?
No, exactly,
yeah. It seems like those problems maybe they don't go away, but they're easier to solve if you smash everything in the same directory, in a shared directory.
That'd be like trash V2, RVD image directory V2.
Yeah, I don't know. I guess I don't have
V2.
Yeah, I don't have a strong opinion.
I think it'd be a lot easier to just do 2 checks.
Yeah. Okay. Any other questions on this one? All right. Last one, fast logging. Thanks, Jason.
Okay, so Keith already started a discussion kind of around this on the mailing list related with respect to C-star logging, but I think it's kind of independent of C-star as well. We have this issue with our current logging framework where it's incredibly slow because it's doing tons of copies of strings everywhere. And for example, Mohammed Gabai on the mailing list mentioned that he tried replacing the dout with a simple like trace log format, which still has the same kind of like string copying, and there's no improvement in the performance at all. So that suggests that in order to get any kind of improvement in performance and be able to turn on logging more often without such a big performance hit, we need to have fewer mem copies, which suggests that maybe a structured logging format rather than using the streaming operators everywhere. Probably some kind of binary format for the actual log, so that we're not kind of generating text from all our internal structures, but rather just copying certain fields directly. And some of this might be simplified if we just started using LTTNG trace points directly, because they already do structured data and efficient gathering and processing of that data on a per core basis. So I think one of the questions here is, could we use trace points for this, or is that going to be too much of a pain to write kind of automatic trace point gathering and reading code, so that it might actually be worth doing a custom format with a custom output parsing and custom gathering? Or perhaps there are other ways that we can try to minimize how much we're outputting as well, in terms of, for example, in the OSD, with every single output from a debug statement in a placement group, we output a whole bunch of fields from the placement group, when we really only need to have that information perhaps every time that the members of that placement group change.
Yeah. Yeah, the current logging is a little bit of a worst case, because you have like 80% of every line is identical from the line before, and it's just a dump of this huge PG thing. That's probably where 80% of the time is spent, and then you have a little bit of stuff at the end. So just getting rid of the prefixes might be big, but it's always hard to like give up that information, because you always want to know what it is.
Right. Right. And you still have the string copies for other things. I think it's unclear to me that whether the prefix is a big cost or not by itself.
I think it feels to me that for what worries, so the binary log option worries me. Maybe I'm going backwards here, but the binary log option worries me, because it'd be all this work to like invent our own log format and like pack strings efficiently and like just make it go faster, in order to do basically the same thing that we were doing before, where we can have sort of like unstructured log values. It seems it seems like we should
just. I think even if we went with the custom format, I think we'd still want to do structured logging anyway, because we wouldn't want to waste time, like for example, outputting exactly the same constant string every time. We want to look that up in that table later.
So if we're gonna go with the structured log entry, then what's the downside of just using trace points? Because I mean, maybe this is sort of my like naive assumption, but it's that the whole point of the trace points is they're like zero cost when they're disabled, and even when they're enabled, they're like highly optimized. They're super fast. I don't really know how true that is, but I thought that was the whole point of using something like LTTNG, is that it's like super low overhead. I wouldn't expect that we'd write something that'd be faster than capturing LTTNG trace points.
Yeah, I think I mostly agree. One thing I did come across when I was looking through the docs, it was that the way they were implementing the producer-consumer model is through a ring buffer, which has two modes of operation: one where it loses events, and one where it starts overwriting, or sorry, one where it I guess keeps blocks older events but loses new ones. Yeah, and it never blocks. It just either throws events away or overwrites them. So we might want to change that.
Mm-hmm.
Or just try to guarantee that we have like a big buffer on the other side that we always read into, so we never fill up the ring buffer.
Is there a message that says that there was an overflow and so you missed something?
I'm not sure. I haven't looked that closely at the actual code that influences it.
It seems like as long as you know that there might be something missing, so it's not like a mystery lost dropped event, then like I wouldn't necessarily worry. I would expect that in most cases, your tracing capture thing would be able to keep up with the rate of jittering entries.
Yeah.
If it doesn't, then something's pretty wrong, and you probably can see like a million of something, you know why it's getting spammed more heavily than it should be. Because I'm kind of the LTT and just straight up LTT&G option also sounds attractive because it's just sort of pushing us all the way to the other end of the spectrum where they're trace points. You sort of construct them carefully. You think about what fields you put in them, which is like kind of what we want. I guess the thing that worries me about it is that in the case of a user where you're like, a user hits a crash and you're like, give me a log, it's more complicated for them to do that. Like they don't just like type one command and like copy a file out of varlog Ceph. They probably have to do something else, but I've never actually used it, so I don't know how hard it is to do.
Yeah, so I think so. The idea is the architecture is basically that there's a producer and a consumer, and the consumer is typically traditionally a command line application that you'd run manually. But I think if we did want to use this for logging, we'd probably want to make that happen automatically and just go to a file in varlog Ceph, perhaps on a per core basis, similar to the way C-star logging works.
So if we do that, what are our options for turning on and off pieces? I mean, I know that LTT&G lets you turn on and off stuff at a very granular level, but
yeah, so
we just like have to build up our own system that like swipes through them all, or
no? So the basically you can provide it with at least a wildcard, if not a regex, to based on the name of the trace point. So we can name trace points based on like our current debug subsystems, for example, and along with like a level, say like error debug, info warn, that kind of thing.
Oh, so it actually does support different granularities.
Well,
like
not directly, but you could name your trace points that way. And then have your tools around that to turn on and off those kinds of trace points.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Oh, and that means you could have the same trace points get turned on by different kinds of logging. That would be nice.
You mean like all the warning or debug level trace points or something, or?
No, like so. Right now we turn it's in the OSD or it's in the file store, or it's in the whatever, and we could like tag them as OSD, but also like write operation or client write or something, and then
like star write star or something like that.
Yeah, and then you could pull them all off for the whole thing without having to go see, I don't know, the snap trimming that's happening or whatever.
Yeah. I guess I would be a little nervous if our expected mode of operation is that this is just on and you always have this like LTT tracer running, just logging to varlog Ceph. Like if it's something that we expect to run like on a normal system in production, I mean, we certainly wanted to be able to do that. So like you should be able to trace a production system without having a huge impact. So I mean, I guess there's that, but it still feels like it should be exceptional.
Well, so maybe this isn't something we want in there, but I really want us to start logging on operations more precisely than we do with the app tracker, because we're going to need that if everything's a future.
Yeah.
And that will be some level of tracking all the time. And this could be a separate system, but I'm definitely attracted, if we're going to do structured stuff, I'm definitely attracted to having them be the same system, and just like maybe you set up like maybe a flag that says like, oh, this is stored on the op all the time, or oh, it's a trace point when we're locking.
I mean, I guess actually the new way that you would do this is you would have is it Elasticsearch? That where you send your logs? You'd have like Elasticsearch and Fluentd, and then you would just say, I want to trace these OSDs, and you'd like set that, and then it all automatically gets slurped up in this nice indexed querying thing. Like you wouldn't have to go collect log files, right?
Well, sure. But what I'm saying is that we have a problem with our users right now where they say, oh, we have this problem. We go, well, do you have any logging turned on? And they go, no. And we're like, well, we have no idea what went wrong then. So it'd be really good if we could have a minimal amount of like seeing what paths happened on the objects that are live right now.
Like
and that does require like requires an amount of ongoing storage payment costs, but it sort of, I mean, I don't know how much more or less expensive that is than just turning on LTTNG all the time and either choosing to log it or not later.
And it doesn't have to be like an on and off thing. We could also use like a sampling approach for the general case where we keep it in memory of every like 100 requests or something.
It still kind of feels to me like the what you're talking about, Greg, is in that op tracker category, is different than logging because you want to keep track of live requests, which might be super old, right? So the op tracker will have something that started 90 seconds ago and is still stuck. Whereas logging is just going to have like the last, 10 seconds of events or whatever it is. Right. You want to have like an in-memory tracking structure that you can go and introspect it.
I mean, so yes, but I also don't want to have to like write it twice. Like if we're going with
the whole idea with tracing though is that's exactly what we use the same kind of trace points to track like distributed tracing for a given IO request and tracing the different steps it goes through in the IO pipeline. But I think that's kind of an orthogonal problem to how we're doing the logging itself.
Well, no. So I mean, so let's say you want to log. You have an event that's important. We have, submitted the rep ops off to our peers. Probably that's a thing that you both want to write down in a log and that you want to attach to the op history. Given that we're talking about doing structured logging anyway, it seems like that should be the same. Like not every single one of them, but like that one should be the same structure and can, like, I don't know how far we need it to go before they diverge, but it would be nice if we could, if the structure we're using could go both ways with just like a flag that we set when we write out the logging event.
It just, I mean, maybe we can have like helpers that kind of do both, but it feels like they're different things. Like one of them is maintaining like a per op mini log in case you get stuck and you want to query its history. It's like an in-memory structure that you're going to throw away, whereas the trace points are like a linear timeline of the whole process and are like going somewhere else.
Well, that's one use of trace points. Like we're talking about logging, so yes, that's what we want our logging to do. But I mean, yes, they may be completely different systems other than some syntactic sugar. That could be too. But I think that both of these are going to need a structure, a structured amount of a structured data payload. And I don't know how hard that is to share or not. Just when we talk about things like this, it's something I'm thinking of. Because it's sort of like they're both logs. It's just that they're sliced differently, right? Like we have a log of the request and we have a log of all the stuff happening. And it seems to me like if we have logs that are sliced differently, they should be part of a unified logging system, not different logging systems that we need to maintain.
Well, it seems like if we were like rolling this ourselves, like generating our own binary log events with our custom stuff, then that would be pretty straightforward to do. Who knows if that's something that LTTNG can do, where you have a different buffer target or something. You have like a buffer per op that you could log to.
Well, I don't think you even need to have the per op buffers. I think you just start maybe turning on the trace points with some condition, right? Like say you want to track the last n requests, you specify Actually, I'm not sure if it can do that.
Yeah, I mean, you can accomplish the same thing that the op tracker is doing if you have the logging on, right? Then an external tool can collate them and like identify the things that got stuck.
Right.
But that requires you to sort of have logging enabled before the fact instead of after the fact. That's sort of the beauty of the op tracker that we have now. I mean, maybe we give up on that of having this like really nice ability to go like look at the stuck stuff, and that would make all our lives way simple, right? We just you have to have logging on if you want to know what got stuck. But that'd make me a little bit sad.
Well, no, I mean, so part of it I think is that even if we have nice, cheaper logging, I think that's really hard for anyone to debug and understand what the issues are. I think we need to go into a more of an introspective model, where you say, okay, like the OSD is stuck. What is the OSD doing right now? Which of these operations is waiting on things, or is waiting on what? Oh, they're all waiting for this one thread to finish flushing to disk. Why is that stuck? Or whatever.
Yeah, so quite difficult to search in the log for an OID or a sequence ID, for example, like in the old good days with the text format log.
I mean, to be fair, I think that like modern tools make this much easier, because when they're structured, you can do all these queries, and so you can just like I've never actually done it, but presumably these fancy GUIs for like the search database or whatever, you can do it. But yeah, I think you're right. I think we need to
like journal control for system D.
What was that?
Not even that low level as journal control, but like the distributed tracing stuff, like with Jaeger, which is like GUI lets you like visualize like where the latency is in a bunch of different requests as they go through the system. And if you see a bunch that are perhaps stuck in this one state in this one daemon, then you can figure out perhaps what's going on with that daemon from there.
Yeah. The other issue with LTTMG, anything based on that, is that a system admin can just turn it off system-wide, as Mohammed raised in the email thread. So there's a couple of downsides as well.
Yeah, I'm not sure if they can turn it off entirely if we were running it within the OSD itself, for example. But if it was a separate process, they could kill that process for sure.
Doesn't LTTMG require a daemon running to collect?
Well, it requires some kind of consumer to be running. It doesn't have to be a separate daemon, I don't think.
Okay.
That's just the usual way that you would run it from the command line.
So you could have a consumer inside the process that's consuming it and writing it to a log file, for example.
I think so.
Okay.
I'm not entirely certain about that because I haven't delved deeply into the which of the APIs are actually public or not.
I guess and I don't know, this is my uninformed gut opinion, is that if we can keep LTTMG's role confined to one where it's like it's something that is not like an internal dependency, like you can run fine without it, and it's not like the user experience changes, unless you're like profiling or debugging or developing, but like normal users wouldn't, there's no dependency for a normal user, then that would be nice, right? Because then it wouldn't matter as much. Like I would get nervous if we relied on LTTMG trace points to like drive the like metrics that are used for RPD top or something like that.
Okay, but if you say that, that means that we aren't relying on ever being able to get logs again from users in the field.
Well, it would be an exceptional thing. Like you would say, type this command to enable the logs or whatever, or and you would run the LTTMG thing, and then they'd be like, oh, it's turned off on my system. I got to turn it on my system or whatever. Like that feels like a acceptable flow, but it seems like
I'm not sure why you think. I'm not sure why we're thinking the overhead of this is going to be so high if we just have something running there not doing anything. Like checking an empty ring buffer shouldn't be much of an issue, should it?
Yeah, it's supposed to be an improvement, not a step backwards.
Yeah, I guess not.
But that's the other thing. How do we measure improvement?
Yeah.
So
I just
have
this idea in my head that our life is simpler if we view the log, whether that's the trace log or the whatever the debug log, as as a debug log, and not something that like a normal person should have to look at unless something goes wrong.
Yeah, I think it's definitely not something that we'd expect anyone who's not a developer to look at, perhaps, unless something went wrong. But
except maybe some exceptional scenarios, like there could be maybe a log of exceptional messages that are not common.
Yeah, I mean this kind of brings me back to like the other part where if so you have these there's a case where you're the developer and you're just trying to like debug your code, like sprinkling pretest everywhere like is great, right? You're dumping out these like huge big maps or whatever because you don't know what you're looking for and you find it there and whatever, it's fine. The problem is when you then that's the only tracing that you have and you're relying on that for the other cases. So I can see that it's good to like disallow that because it forces you to like have well-structured trace points. But like half of the debug messages, I'm just pulling that number out of my butt, but half of those those debug messages are exceptional situations. Like you got into a weird corner case that like shouldn't have happened, and you're just printing out like, why am I here? And I'm gonna like the error code is X. That's not what I expected, and so you just want to like log that so you don't lose that information.
Yeah. So.
But a subsequent crash.
You have a trace point for every one of those.
Yeah, well, there is a. Well, you want that what if a subsequent crash happens, and so then you see that you output this, you hit this place in the code that you didn't expect, and then it later asserted, so you now have that information, but that's why you put that message there because you didn't know why that would get there.
Yeah.
So the other thing that LTTNG has is instead of defining static trace points like that, it does have like a trace log function where you have a more natural way to just
dump a string.
Kind of dump a string, yeah.
So you can define an event that looks like anything. So yeah, you can define an event that is
a DL.
My dummy free points.
Yeah.
So one aspect of this that I think is maybe useful to at least think about is that whenever a user, my assumption, whenever like a user or a system administrator sees something in a log that precedes an OSD crashing or something crashing, their first instinct is to type it into Google and just say, here's what I saw. What does this mean? What do I do now? So as we're talking about all of this, the easiest mechanism, I guess, one thing we shouldn't lose is making it easy for somebody to be able to say, this is what I saw. Now, what does it mean? And what's the quickest way for me to, turn around from this?
If you have if you could do the thing where it's the built-in LTT consumer daemon inside the OSDs or whatever, that could basically say, well, if it's a certain class of thing, it's error or whatever, I can also redirect it to syslog or whatever, just like the current login infrastructure does. So you have a consistent way to do logging and tracing, like exceptional logging, there's an error, and you have a way to do tracing, but it's all using trace points, and then just where the consumer grabs it and says, oh, that's actually pretty important, let me dump it out of the binary format and convert it to something that's human readable and throw it someplace where someone's going to see it.
So is just one question is, are you envisioning that an entire PG is in the binary format for some of the messages that currently would print the PG summary?
I think we would want to insert like trace points where some of those fields would change, but not everywhere where we currently print the prefix.
Yeah.
What about if we were to store a largish cache of high-level debugging log and only dump that to disk? It doesn't get around the string problem, but I was thinking we'd only dump that if we hit an error condition. So if we hit a message where capital E, RR would be generally printed in one of the logs. We could dump out our cache in memory, but otherwise it just falls off the back end, so it'd just be a ring buffer.
I mean, that's basically what DAD does now.
Okay.
You can configure the level you collect and the level that you log as two different values, and then if you crash, it'll print the last n entries at the highest level it collected.
Yeah, but I'm not talking about a crash. I'm talking about
just an error condition.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I guess again the cost right now is it's all the string processing. So even logging into memory is too expensive. I guess theoretically we could like save all the objects that we wanted to log at that point in time and that kind of snapshot them, but that gets kind of crazy in terms of actual lifetime.
Yeah. I think once we like are in a situation where we really need to go fast, like we can't really pay the price, right? So we want to make the tracing as cheap as possible, but in the general case, it's going to be off, and we're not going to be collecting anything.
Right.
One thing we could think about is trying to do some kind of copy of the data structures and dumping that'll be static and dumping pointers to them in the trace points, so then we can like print out all of whatever we're interested in. I'm not sure if there's a good way to do that with the garbage collection or the reference issues that would come up, but
like if you have a core dump, like with a trace point.
Yeah, or I mean, like David was asking about the PG structure, and I mean, like, just it could be that whenever we change the PG info or whatever, we like take a copy of the newer of the new one and start using that for dumping out to the trace points, so that we can change the live one whenever, but the trace point, like the trace point consumer, can go see what the old values were. I mean, that's too simple. That won't work, but we could see if there's some model that lets us do similar things to that.
Yeah, I'm not really sure if it's worth it though, because a lot of the time I think we're not interested in a lot of the fields. Maybe we only care about a few of them.
I mean, yes, that could be. It's just a thought I had.
Well, so coming back a little bit here, maybe we can come to some high-level conclusions. There's sort of like three options, right? There's like going whole hog LTT&G. There's inventing our own binary log thing, and there's sort of the freeform DAD stuff we have now. Is there any compelling reason to keep considering like writing our own special binary log format and not doing LTT&G?
Would you not run into the same issues with like memory management and string copies and things like that with any binary format that you run into with LTT-NG?
That's kind of what it feels. It feels like they're the same thing.
Yeah.
LTT&G is already implemented. I think the one thing that kind of worries me about, not the one thing, but the one other thing that worries me about LTT&G is that all the trace points we have are like super tedious to define, because you have to like, you put the trace point, which looks like a macro call. And then in a different file, in the .tp file, you like define all the argument types. It's just tedious. It's tedious to write. So I'd be a little bit nervous if like that's really what we have to do for like every single trace point.
Yeah, I wonder if we can.
Sorry, I haven't done this, but yeah,
automatically.
There's got to be some way to compile out what we need, I hope. Has anyone besides Sage written a trace point in the last 5 years?
I haven't written a trace point. Cut and pasted them.
Okay.
But the other thing is that for like the error conditions and stuff, we could just use the like trace log, arbitrary string format.
Yeah, they look. Where's the libreus?
It's basically like you're writing a function signature with like specific types.
Regarding to the client side logging.
I'm just thinking, yeah, these client-side logging. Oh, no, we have one for like object store. I don't know. They're just annoying to deal with, but that's what we want. Well, okay, so sorry, getting back to what I was saying. There's that. So if we can, I think we would save ourselves time if we can just like, if we can decide that LTTNG is going to solve our problems and we can not have to re-implement it ourselves in a slightly different way. That would be nice. But the other thing is there still a need for a structured like logging dout thing, or do we just throw out dout and we just replace it with a single trace point that like stringifies the whole thing and logs a string?
As long as it doesn't get abused and everyone starts putting in the, it's too hard to create trace points, I'm just going to do the string
of log everything. Yeah, well, I mean, it kind of feels like they're, and I mean, maybe this is like a deeply ingrained habit.
The binary format, right? Because if you did like your own self-created binary log format, someone could do the exact same thing. Yep, stringify the entire thing because that's way easy.
But it feels like there's just this. There's the case where I'm just like writing the code and there's like I can't figure out what's going on. I just want to dump the whole structure. Like there are going to be trace points like that. Logging. Like there are a bunch of places in the monitor where like if the CRC mismatches encoding an OSD map, I like do a hex dump of the encoded version that mismatched so that I can like go back and compare them and see actually what was different, or do like a JSON dump. It's at like a crazy high debug level, so you only do it if you're at like debug level 30, but like.
But that's also something that's not happening like in the IO path and taking up like 20% of your CPU.
Exactly right. These are
but I mean,
the
that's probably not a thing we can do in LTTNG though, right? Like
no, you can dump arbitrary strings. So you do the same thing. You can string.
Well, no, what I'm saying is that may well actually exceed the ring buffer or the allocated space for LTTNG.
I mean, you can define the ring buffer size. It's like megabytes. I'm not sure where we could dump more than megabytes in one line.
Yeah.
Sage, would those be?
You can also just dump it on C-Air.
Sage, would those be a class of output that you wouldn't care if we just like periodically like deleted everything in tree after, or periodically just like pruned it all out?
I don't know. I mean, every time it's not there and there's an OSD debug CRC error. Like I added one maybe like 2 years ago where if the CRC matches on the OSD, just doesn't match on the OSD, it dumps a hex dump of the thing that didn't match. And I mean, those pop up every like 2 months. There's a bug where there's an OSD encoding mismatch and I have to go figure out where the encoding feature wasn't right and why it was right. And every single time I liked that dump is exactly what I need. And if it wasn't there, then you'd have to like add it in again and then recompile and then try to reproduce the same bug and then get it. Like you just leave it in the tree. But those are exceptional situations, right? They're not supposed to happen, and we only have the debug level set high enough to actually see those on like our test cluster, and not like users would never see it.
Yeah.
Well, so maybe the answer is that instead of doing that, we just actually put in a mechanism for writing debug data to
a file. Right, we just write it to a file.
Because then it doesn't. No, because I mean, then it doesn't even need to be a debug thing. It's just like, write this out. Just if it ever happens, write it out, and then like we can say, hey, give us all the files, and verilib ceph broken.
Yep. Yeah, that's not unlike the crash dump thing we were talking about the other day.
Yeah, I hate to say it, but I have some tests in the standalone suite where running with vstart and with a high log level that looks in the log to verify something.
Yep. Sir. Okay. Well, I guess, do we have it, Josh, do we have like a list of things to like figure out to make progress? Is it like the feasibility of having an in-process consumer that writes stuff out? I guess that's one thing.
Yeah, I think the feasibility of having that consumer.
If you have to write those function definitions every time.
Yeah.
Yeah, fixing test cases. Yeah. Yep. Okay. Well, I think that the sooner we can settle on a path forward, then the better. So this seems like a good thing to do early in the C-star conversion stuff, so we can just.
Yeah, I think it's actually unrelated to the C-star directly. I think we want to do this independent of the C-star, because even today, we have the issues where someone hits a bug and we can't get them to turn on logging because it's too slow.
So yeah, that's true. I just right.
But can we do this in parallel in our existing project, like using the LTTNG and the DLT approach at the same time? That would be disaster for debugging the.
Yeah, I think we certainly want to leave the existing DLT stuff in for now, and get first we need to prove out whether we can switch everything over to LTTNG, and then start slowly adding trace points where it makes sense in the OSD, and maybe start that at that point starting to remove the old DLT stuff there.
Mm-hmm.
Or probably you can have a code level conversion layer over the trace log using some templates to cover difference between them. The first step is to convert the DLT to a more printf friendly coding style.
Well, could we just change the DLT macro so that it actually just emits an LTTNG trace point?
Yeah, we could.
Because then we don't have to actually touch the code.
Level compatible.
Yeah.
I think at some point though we might actually want to go through every DLT statement and figure out whether it's actually necessary as well.
Yeah, that too.
What fields are actually making sense.
Yeah, because it doesn't really. It would mean that we can switch to an LTTNG based framework instead of our log DLT framework. And then once that's done, then we can actually make the trace points better as opposed to just preform strings.
Right.
So we wouldn't have competing log files or something weird like that.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Sounds good. Anything else?
That covers it.
All right, cool. That's everything on the list. Any other topics we want to cover? We're out of time anyway. Look at that. It's exactly 2 hours. Getting good at this. All right. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.
Later. Thanks.
See you tomorrow.
See you guys.